When you come in, you'll be asked to wear a mask. Ask you to also Purell your hands. It's strong clinic, so they're pretty tight precautions that are made in terms of spacing, in terms of patient waiting room spacing. We haven't been very successful at not having any patients acquire COVID within our system over the past year. So that's been really good. I'm going to take you on a quick tour. The clinic area has all been sort of totally changed as a result of COVID, where we have things spaced out quite a bit. And I'm taking you into the laser area. This is the first laser room that we have. This is the Zimmer femtosecond laser. I'm a consultant to Zimmer and work with them extensively. I actually used to coordinate all their US program, scientific programs. This is what we call Mr. Bubbles. It actually creates about 20 million bubble pulses over several seconds. And that actually creates that little separation. And then in the cornea, and that allows us to lift the flap and then reshape the cornea. Once we do that, we actually reshape the cornea with the excimer laser. This, the femtosecond laser is on wheels. It rotates over here. It's got a detachable arm so that we can actually put it into position. Then the patient is laying here. These are those little antennas that you saw earlier. These are actually infrared lights that illuminate the iris, and the iris image is then confirmed for the patient. It's actually a fingerprint, and so your right iris is different than your left iris, which is different than everybody else in the world. Well, this system actually maps that out. It's like mapping the Himalayan mountains in multiple directions. It can very, very easily identify the patient's eye and then make sure that the eye is aligned exactly right. During the actual laser treatment, I'm looking through the microscope, and I have a whole series of toggles and switches here to make sure that the patient's aligned exactly right. During the procedure, you've got a foot pedal here, and this is actually how I activate the laser. If the patient happens to move off a little bit, then I'll take my foot off the pedal and then get them realigned and go ahead and resume treatment. Patients are always worried about two things. First is, what happens if I move? And the answer is that I just take my foot off the pedal. I can see if you move even 20 or 30 microns, less than a human hair. If that happens, I'll stop, get you realigned, go ahead and resume treatment. During the actual treatment, I actually don't trust the tracker. I actually start and stop and start and stop, and I make sure that tracker is aligning exactly right. And that makes for basically creating better optics, better visual performance afterwards. The other thing that patients are always worried about is what happens if I blink. And the answer is you can't blink. We put a lid holder around the eye, and that actually keeps you from blinking. You might twitch a little bit like that, but it doesn't really have any effect on the actual treatment. So that I've had the procedure. Dr. Dickerson's had the procedure. When we first put that lid holder in, it feels kind of awkward. You want to twitch for a few seconds, and then your brain actually gets used to that sensation, and that goes away. So we're going to go next door to another laser room. This is the other laser area, and this is the Vizix laser. These lasers have a lot of a bit of an echo here, so I'm going to get closer to the camera. These lasers have a lot of background in Rochester. The Vizix laser was developed by Charles Meyerland, who was a University of Rochester professor. He actually was here for many years, and then went out into private industry, worked for Coherent, and then eventually was laid off because they closed down his division. He was head of the division. His wife said, well, Judy said, well, you've always wanted to start a company. Why don't you start a little company? Well, he teamed up with Steve Trokel. And Steve Trokel, that human hair that you saw earlier, Steve Trokel was the one that kind of developed the idea to use the excimer laser to reshape the cornea. And Trokel had actually done his undergraduate degree here and then did his master's of science degree here as well. So he got together with Charles Meyerland. They created this little company called Technolots, and eventually grew that company to the second largest ophthalmic laser company in the world. Technolots was eventually, they sold it for $1.8 billion. So they both did very well in terms of that. But the point is that Rochester was key to this laser actually being developed. In addition, the Bosch and Lomb laser was based out of Rochester as well. Third laser company that I work for, there are basically 5 major ophthalmic laser companies. The third one is Nidec, and I was their medical director basically for many years until I started working with Bosch and Lomb, which I felt was a better technology. So Nidec was actually started by Mr. Ozawa, who actually did his optics training here at the University of Rochester. His son is now the CEO of Nidec. There are 20,000 people working for that company now. It started with 10 in the early days. And he also is a University of Rochester optics graduate. So there's a lot of high-powered optics that actually have been developed here in Rochester that sort of emanates in the whole laser world has had a lot of expert people that helped develop it from Rochester. In addition, there are about 100 different companies in this area. They're all optics companies that are sort of an offshoot of the Institute of Optics here at the University of Rochester, which is why we can do so much development. So we're going to go next door through the clinic. So this is the clinical area. We have a whole series of exam rooms. This is some exam equipment. We actually have 3 rooms of this. Ophthalmology is great because there's lots of toys that you can play with that help you do diagnostics. It's very you can do very accurate diagnostic testing with that. This is another diagnostic room with wavefront sensors. Here's another diagnostic room with a whole series of wavefront sensors. This is sort of ground zero where a lot of technology was developed. This is the Xywave that was actually developed by Dave Williams here at the University of Rochester. It sat on an optical bench that went from here to the wall with all sorts of prisms and mirrors that would change the light. That technology was licensed to Bosch and Lomb and then condensed into a wavefront sensor. This is the actual commercial version of that, the Xywave. That, when I first came, Bosch and Lomb bought the patent rights to the Xywave, and then they bought a diagnostic equipment company called Ortec, and they had a really fantastic corneal topographer. Well, this is that topographer. Eventually, we sort of combined those 2 technologies together. This is called the dual workstation, and the 2 are used to create the files that we drive the laser treatment with. In addition to that, the other laser that we showed you, the Vuzix laser, is actually driven by the eye design. Now, this is another wavefront sensor that is super sensitive. And so we use this in patients that have very specific subtle needs in terms of actually improving their optics. The beauty of this system is that it's super, super sensitive, super accurate. And we use that for certain patients. So some patients we use the Vuzix system, some patients we use the Bosch and Lomb system. And it really depends on individual tests that we do to see who we think would be better off, who we can create better optics with this system or that system. So we're going to go one last area back into the waiting area. Then I'm going to turn things back to Dr. Dickerson. It will open it up to your questions and have a couple testimonials as well. So take it away, Dr. Dickerson.